Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Start Small, Think Big podcast brought to you by Digital Meld. My name is Brad Grew, founder and CEO of Digital Meld.
And I'm Robert Grew, founder and CTO at Digital Meld.
I'm Raj Singh. I'm the VP for new products at Mozilla.
Yeah, so we're again joined by another guest following Lisa Talbot from last week. So thank you, Raj, for coming in. Raj has an extreme background. I think we're about the same age. I think he graduated high school in the late 90s like myself. And then he's been on a technology journey ever since, much like I have, but at a much bigger scale and out there in Silicon Valley having some fun and doing some great things. And so we hope to gain some great insights from him today. I think he's been through a couple of exits he'll talk about and like how that can help us as businesses transform and drive adoption in within your team. We talk about adoption from a use case scenario, but I think the big thing that's Raj is passionate about is how you drive adoption across your teams and cross-functionally. And so it should be a fun conversation.
Great. Yeah, looking forward to this.
We usually start with news, and I think we're only going to talk about one news subject today just because I think it's really important because Apple's WWDC is going on, and they just released an AI paper called Apple's Illusion of Thinking. The paper found that when faced with unfamiliar or complex logic puzzles, the model's accuracy experiences a complete collapse, challenging the narrative that they're on a clear path to true general intelligence. So I think if you listen to Sam Altman at OpenAI and all these others, they think we're pretty close to general intelligence, but Apple's kind of throwing a cog in that wrench today by saying that what we think is on the path of general intelligence is more they're just really good at repeating what they've been taught. And so we won't dive too much in the conversation, but I just thought it was an interesting topic to have. And because we are chasing this latest and greatest technologies and kind of where we go from there.
Yeah, I think there was a podcast with Alexander from Scale AI. They do all the data annotation. And one of the comments he made, which I thought was interesting, and this was like on the road to AGI, he was talking about how there are thousands of sort of vertical sort of use cases, yet we don't have annotated data for a lot of those workflows. So for example, computers, AI may know how to drive a car because we've annotated tons of data around it, but doesn't know how to ride a bicycle. We talk about all these physical things, physical AI and robots and whatnot. And so the same is true within software and puzzles and whatnot. So it doesn't surprise me that Apple has created some questions or logic puzzles or whatnot that have never been seen before. Maybe it's done in a different way. It's remarkable in its own right, just because of the volume of content that's been created. But I think of at a certain level, AI is pattern matching and it's learning. And so I know we call it reasoning, but underneath the hood, reasoning might be a strong statement. It's basically running derivatives of things that it understands and synthesizing. And so I guess I'm not surprised that they found instances where it's not performing, but at the same time, it's the fastest learner we've ever had. And so to the extent that we can start annotating more examples within those buckets, right? Each of these workflows, each of these tools, like seeing how somebody uses Salesforce, and that there's just not a lot of data around that, right? There's a lot of public data around what Salesforce does, but the private stuff, workflows and things like that, we just don't have a lot of annotated data around that. So as we start annotating these other sort of workflows and data, these models will continue to get better. And if I recall in that podcast, Alexander was really thinking that was sort of the block to sort of getting to AGI, was getting as many of these sort of private workflows that are non-obvious, annotated, so we can start training our LLMs to incorporate these new tools.
Raj, just for some of the users, a lot of the people that are following this are going to be just small business leaders. When you're saying annotated data, just so everybody's on the same page, could you kind of jump into that a little bit further by what you mean? I think Brad and I understand, but I want to make sure it's clear for the audience.
Yeah, let's take a really simple case. So like before large language models, there was a feature many years ago introduced that would hyperlink the phone number in your email. So if you write an email, you see a little hyperlink. That didn't happen automatically. Like there's something called named entity recognition or NER. So somebody basically went out and said, hey, this is what a phone number looks like, and provided dozens and dozens of examples so they could actually ultimately get to a point where we could train a model around it. And so sort of say, hey, this is a phone number. And so that's an annotated set of data where they had a bunch of examples, let's say a bunch of emails, and they said, these are where the phone numbers are, right? Before that, they were doing probably something more rules-based. So they were like looking for numbers and like kind of like when you do a search in email.
Like regex or something.
Sure, yeah, exactly. But the same thing now, level that up, right? So like if you want to teach a robot how to wash dishes, it doesn't know how to wash dishes. It knows what a dish is because it understands that from the Wikipedia. It's read that. But it hasn't seen humans wash dishes thousands of times and thousands of different permutations. And so what they'll do is they'll take a ton of these videos of people washing dishes, and then they'll send it to an annotation team. So Scale AI, which I'm using the example of Alexander, which I mentioned at the onset, which is probably one of the larger sort of data annotation companies in the world, has huge teams who will look at these videos and then write down precisely like what is happening. So at this point, this is the dish and this is where they're applying a sponge or whatever, right? And this in some ways is sort of almost providing instructions back to the AI to learn from. And I'm super simplifying, and I'm probably not giving necessarily the best examples, but I'm just sort of giving a sense of how this works. And so that's what I sort of mean by annotating data. Now you have to apply this to like all sorts of workflows. And that's why actually one of the things that's been interesting is like the early large language models, they were very quickly trained on all the text data on the internet. But then it quickly became, well, how about all the video data? Like YouTube, etc. And the video data, it's not just the transcripts, all of the visual data is new opportunities to learn, right? A lot of this is just like human beings. When we're kids, when you're in a classroom, you learn by looking at how others cut the paper or make that origami project or whatnot. And in a similar fashion, AI is not too dissimilar.
No, I think that was a good job. Definitely. It's funny. We talk about this all the time we work with a lot of small businesses, small enterprises. And that's the one thing a lot of the leadership and people trying to drive this change don't understand, the amount of data that's needed to do even just the simplest of tasks, right? If you look at ChatGPT or any LLM, like at face value, it's just like, oh, this stuff works really well. Why can't you do this or do that, right? And so that what they don't realize, I think a lot of people, it's starting to click now, but most people don't realize how much data is involved, and not even just the data, but like you said, annotating it, explaining what is actually happening here. So yeah, I think you did a good job.
Yeah, there's actually, just as the quick 101, there's multiple steps in building a large language model. The first step, they kind of take the whole internet, they ingest all of it, and they let the AI look for patterns and correlations and connections, whatever you want. But then there's the next step where they do what they call supervised fine tuning. And that's where they're taking all this annotated data and then fine tuning against it. So saying, hey, here's some examples of what this actually should look like, right? And so that whole sort of part of the process is how to get from like just a ingestion of the whole internet to what we experience now.
I think that plays a key role into what we try to sell with our customers is their processes are so important, because their processes are those workflows you're talking about, right? Like how they get from point A to point Z across their business, across their organization, regardless of how these models have been trained in Silicon Valley. There's this magic that happens is because of that secret sauce within an organization and training it on those things. And I think that's where, we'll have general intelligence, but they'll still be quite ignorant when it comes to like the internal business process of all these organizations all across the world. And it's going to take us years to get that out of people's heads and inboxes and internal documentation and things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a different question, like what's the definition of AGI? All right. And that's not even standardized in itself. I think right now, and what you're going to see over the next couple of years is people are using LLMs mostly as a question answer kind of engine. Like I have a question, can you answer it? Is getting to the point where it can actually do some actions. Ironically, Erie gets a lot of heat right now for being, let's say, dumb. But where they started 15 years ago, they were much more of an action engine. It was like, go book me a reservation. And then it used a bunch of web APIs to get that done. Here, current LLM era, it's mostly an answer engine. But why can't it also be an action engine? Why can't I have it say, hey, and you see that now, like deep research, like go do market research and then put together this table. But well, can I go a step further? Can you pay my credit card bill? Right. Or, things like that. And so I think those things are going to happen. I think this is, whether we call them integration of more tools through MCP or whatever it is. I mean, there's all these, I don't want to throw out a bunch of buzzwords, but like, I think this stuff is happening.
I think it plays right into the theme of the episode, which is how can business and product leaders encourage their teams to move beyond the AI surface level and start meaningfully augmenting their day-to-day workflows, which these tools are built for. At the end of the day, it's if this, then that. That's what the models are doing. It's just if this doesn't work, then let's move on to something else. They are be able to go down those logic trees, and so much like in your organization, you would as well. So I think, Raj, now's a good time for you to just take a few minutes and give folks an understanding of your background and why you're passionate about this topic and why you're really passionate about training up leaders to teach their teams how to buy in and adopt these tools from a team perspective.
I think, most of my career, I've been a builder. So I've been building stuff, sometimes failed, sometimes successfully. I landed at Mozilla. They acquired my last company. You're often understaffed and under-resourced. You're a startup. You raise money. Sometimes you're not in a position to raise money. Maybe you're not, don't have access to capital, whatever it is. And so you have to get a lot done with very little. And so I've always been in this mindset of keep it scrappy, right? We got to figure out how to make this work. We have minimal resources. And one thing that does happen when you do have limited resources is you get creative. I call it creative execution. You start thinking out of box. Like, how do I get this done? And I don't have any resources or anyone to help me here, right? And so Gen AI has been the ultimate sort of like democratization of fractional expertise. Like, we have access to fractional experts of every role, whether it's legal, HR, growth, QA, you name it, right? And yes, they're not necessarily the top 1%, but it's representing, let's say, the top 95%. And that's frankly a lot better than where I'm at, because if you asked me to do legal stuff, I'd probably be in the bottom 10%. And so all of a sudden now that's a huge unlock, because that means I can get more done without needing to spend dollars or spending the time that's involved to go and learn those new sort of skills. So now we take that sort of mindset and we say, okay, well, how can we apply this in an organization? What is that productivity gain? How can we create that sort of boost? And so I've been thinking a lot about that just within Mozilla. Our teams are obviously we're in the tech sector, and so our teams by all standards are well ahead of probably, let's say, most of the broader industry, because just by the nature of being in tech. But at the same time, changing people's workflows is not easy. People have been taking notes a certain way their whole career. People have a certain approach in how they write a performance review, or how they do a competitive analysis, or how they do their slide creation, or write code, or whatever it might be. It doesn't matter, workflow to workflow. And so what I have found, again, it's early innings, but what I found to be the best way to sort of encourage and drive change is not to try to mandate something top down. And we know that doesn't work. You can talk to any VP of sales who tries to mandate all their account executives and sales development reps and whatnot to say, hey, you have to do Salesforce this way. And it never works. Like, it may work for like a month, and then they start resorting to what works for them. And then the VP of sales like, well, you know what? They're hitting their quota. Who cares, right? So it doesn't work. You can't force people to change their workflow. But what I have found that does work, or at least early innings, is to just show and tell. So literally take vertical by vertical or occupation by occupation and have people show how are they using AI in their day-to-day workflows, and what sort of tools are they using, and why did they decide to use AI in this particular instance and not in this other instance, and whatnot. And so that, as sort of a first unlock, really can have a massive impact. And you really have to do it by functional role. You have the engineers showing what they're doing and the accountants listening in on your team. And they're like, this doesn't really resonate with me. But when the accountant is showing what they're doing to sort of accelerate, let's say, their Google Sheets or Excel workflow or whatever it might be around data organization or whatnot, the other accountants are listening and they're watching, like, whoa, that's a huge time save. I can save a lot of time if I start doing that too. Right. And so that's sort of part one. And part two is, there's a tendency to think or believe that I go listen to a class, or I listen to me talking right now, or I go watch a YouTube video and I know how to do it. And that may apply to some things. Like, if you're taking a history lesson, that's very informative, and you can absorb and learn and kind of understand and grasp the issue, and you can internalize it. Unfortunately, when it comes to sort of applying LLM use, like AI chats, AI chatbots, whatever you want to call it, there is a tribal knowledge aspect that you simply can't replicate unless you go and do it. You can watch a YouTube video, but the problem is this is such a fluid thing. It changes every day. These AI chat experiences are improving. The technology underneath is getting better. You have to actually go and try and do it yourself. Like, go paste 1,000 rows from your Google Sheet and say, hey, can you plot this graph? It's like, oh, why didn't it work this time? And part of this process, interestingly, is really forcing you to start thinking a little bit in a more Socratic way. It's sort of like, break down the problem. What are the questions to be asked? Like, if I was to write this as an instruction manual, how would I write this? If I was to explain this to my 5-year-old daughter, how would I do that? Right. And that exercise and that way of thinking is more ingrained for some folks, particularly if you come from more of a STEM background, where you have to break down a problem into a series of steps. But for many, that's an abstract way of thinking. But it's something that can easily be learned and practiced, and then once honed upon, it's going to feel like a superpower unlock that you've never experienced before. So I think these are some things that I've been thinking about. I mean, there's more, but just sort of sharing some initial insights and how I'm kind of approaching this problem in terms of driving more Gen AI adoption across broader organizations.
I think it's all great points. I'm curious, from your perspective, we're in Houston, right? So most of the companies we're working with, most of the folks following probably this podcast, I'd assume, I mean, if we had all the demographics, oil and gas, construction, engineering type roles, we're always telling them, like, look, you kind of need a committee, and it's a cultural thing too. And like you were saying, you need to get everybody involved, not a top-down approach. You need to get the base level engineers involved to have them explain what they're using this on the day-to-day, because I think a lot of people are using these tools, but there's not a lot of knowledge sharing right now. I think especially in some sectors, it's a little bit taboo almost. We've talked about this before. It's almost like cheating a little bit still. Even when we're in meetings with customers, it's like, it feels kind of weird asking them if we can record the meetings, right? Just to get the transcripts to make your life so much easier. There's still this kind of this mysticalness around it. How would you say, like, in the tech sector, Silicon Valley, I mean, what are internally, you don't have to go into too much detail because I'm sure, you probably can't, but what kind of things are you guys doing over there, or are you hearing companies doing to kind of get everybody more involved and sharing and using these tools?
One thing we've done at Mozilla is we have actively tried to encourage sharing in broader meetings, individuals showing how they're using Gen AI to sort of accelerate their workflow. You could think of it like almost like a demo day. You could think of that as almost like a standing meeting. Another thing we do, at least within the new products team, is we liberally let you use whatever tools you want. So if you think of a lot of organizations, that could be a huge problem because, like, oh, am I allowed to use this tool or whatnot, right? We have some guardrails around it, but for the most part, we're like, hey, we're building new products. This is new data. We're not like feeding in customer data or anything like that. Of course, that raises other questions or other sort of compliance or security or privacy you may need to go through. But we shouldn't let you not want to play with tools. If you want to play with different tools, find what tools work for you. We'll just expense it out. We'll cover it. And the reality is, you might be concerned about the costs as a company, but the cost of the trial and error of them playing with new tools versus the productivity gain is like a magnitude difference, right? Like the cost is negligible, but the productivity gain could be like 10x. So why wouldn't you make that investment? And actually, to further that point, I saw a tweet recently from Farhan, who's the VP of engineering at Shopify, somebody I know from the past, which I thought was really interesting. And he basically said, not only let them use whatever tools they want to use to figure out what they like or what works in their workflow, give them unlimited tokens. And for those in the podcast that don't necessarily understand what that means, a lot of these tools, you don't pay a fixed monthly subscription, you pay based on usage. And that usage maps what they call tokens. Without going into the technical detail of what that means, but basically how many words you're feeding into your AI chat, right? And so, Farhan makes the argument that, hey, if you're spending $1,000 a month in tokens as an engineer using AI coding tools, that's great. That means you're probably creating 40% more output, right? And if you start spending 10,000 a month and I'm getting concerned, I'm not going to react and go like, whoa, why are you spending 10,000 a month? I'm actually going to go to you and ask, how are you spending 10,000 a month? Because that means you must have unlocked some form of acceleration that I haven't figured out yet, right? And so, it's a different kind of perspective. It's a very half full sort of perspective way of looking at it. But I think these are some examples or tactics you can use. Something that I recently gave a talk on Maven, part of their super IC series on this particular topic around creating more adoption of Gen AI within an organization. And one thing I talked about that people may or may not want to consider is actually writing out their day. And that sounds really crazy, like the sort of you think of like user journeys and day in a life workflows and product management, but like doing it for yourself. Like, how are you spending your day? Where are you spending your time? But not like, okay, I brushed my teeth. No, like the time you're in front of a computer, like we're actually doing work. Like break that down in sort of 10-minute things and then look at that and say, hey, could I have accelerated that part of my day with Gen AI and how? And just that, so it's really to force that sort of thought exercise. And it may turn out like, hey, I can, right? And then usually the next stumbling block I hear from people is like, well, what tool am I supposed to use? The reality is 99% of people don't need state-of-the-art SOTA tools. GPT or Claude or whatever they decide to use, Google Gemini, their default is good enough. Like at this point, they've all hit a sort of baseline where the 95% is good enough. If you need SOTA tools, you're in a different bracket. Vast majority, you can literally just get started and try to ignore all that noise because you could very quickly fall into this trap of like, oh, what am I supposed to use for this? What am I supposed to use for that? But these are just some sort of blanket recommendations to get started.
That's great. So Raj has shared the Super IC roadmap presentation with us. We'll link to that in the show notes and then also in our newsletter that releases the following Monday. So make sure you check that out along with all the links to everything we're talking about in this podcast. And one of those links includes a post that Raj made a couple weeks ago on LinkedIn where he kind of came up with a matrix for AI coding adoption levels. And so, Raj, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just share my screen and share that with you. And you can kind of walk folks through that and kind of how that translate. Again, for the folks that aren't part of like a development team and, on the coding side, the processes kind of still work. It's just that you're dealing with different languages and lingo and those things, but how you work across functionally within your team still should be very, very good from that perspective. So take it away, Raj.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to up level this because it doesn't necessarily apply just to AI coding. One thing that was interesting is I was thinking about just within my own teams, surveying the different ways people were using Gen AI as part of their development process. And I realized it was wide and varied. And surprisingly, this probably would be exactly the same if you talk to the person in marketing, or if you talk to the person in product management or in design or whatnot. There was the most superficial level, which was like, hey, and so this is, you could think it for the non-coders on the call, it was just simply autocomplete. So you're like in your Gmail app and you type in an email and like auto-completes the word, right? So the equivalent of that in coding is something called GitHub Copilot, which is popularly used for sort of coding auto-completion. So I'm like, okay, that's like kind of the basic, right? And a lot of people are using that, right? I'd be hard pressed to find anybody still using like typewriter style word processing. All right. But then the next level was like, okay, they're writing their document or they're writing their code, and they need assistance with one part of that code. So they go into ChatGPT or they go into Gemini and they ask. It's like, hey, can you help me refine this paragraph? Or can you help me find the bug in this part of the code? And that's sort of what I'm calling level 2, right? Then level 3 is what we've seen is actually full-blown development tools with AI baked in, right? And so interestingly, on the word processor side, so if we think about documents, those are just emerging. We recently saw the Coda Grammarly merger acquisition. Coda's been talking about how they want to make an AI first word processor or content authoring tool. Similarly, Notion is trying to move in this direction. So we'll have to see what that looks like on the word processing side. But on the coding side, we are seeing development tools where basically the tool where you write your code with chatbots built in on the right hand side, deeply integrated to the experience. And so this is not only allowing, you could think of this if you're a Gmail user, not just word completion. It's like pre-draft the whole email, right? So it's like entirely like email auto reply, right? Like the whole sort of thing, right? And so this is like another sort of productivity boost. I'm calling this level 3. And then level 4 is where you actually you have to reframe your thinking a little bit, but you actually make the leap of going from an assistive tool to an autonomous tool, where this tool is actually going end to end. So a good example is if you're in engineering, typically you have a list of tasks tracked in some kind of tracking system. Could be like Jira. These are just generic project management systems. Could be Trello, could be Asana, whatnot, right? You take that task, and then usually an engineer will take that task, and then they'll implement the task as a set of code, and then they'll submit that code for review by their team members. That's called a PR, or a pull request is commonly what that's called. The equivalent of that, if you think of your word processing document, so I'm kind of juggling between two archetypes here to simplify for the audience, is let's imagine I had an article and I rewrote a paragraph, and now I have to submit that based on feedback from somebody, and now I have to submit that paragraph back to the editor to review. In level 4, this is end to end. So they take the task directly from the to-do list. The AI will read the instructions from the task. The task could say, edit this part of the code to add support for this feature. It goes and looks at the code, implements the feature, and then submits it back for review. So it's completely end to end, no human intervention until the final step to just review it and approve it. The equivalent for a document, some reviewer gave feedback, they rewrite this entire paragraph or add a section about this. The AI looks at that, interprets it, adds the whole section in the document, submits it back for review. So in that case, it's end to end, it's almost autonomous. And so some people describe this as agents. And so that's what I'm calling level 4. And each of these levels from level 1 to 4, particularly level 3 and 4, can be very significant productivity boosts. Where we're not talking 10, 20, 30%, but it could easily be upwards of 100%. So effectively doubling, maybe even tripling your output, depending on how you've incorporated this into your workflow. One of my team members directly within my team has a level 4 type of process, and he's taking smaller tickets or smaller to-dos from our bug tracking system and letting the AI just end to end complete it. So then he just has to review it. And so in that way, it's almost like a coding partner. And you're starting to see some of this language where Salesforce is coming out and saying, we're going to hire 10,000 engineers, but they don't mean real people. I mean AI engineers, like actual machines to do work for you. And in this way, one of my direct team members is actually using an AI agent to do the work for him. It's not a real human. And so I think this is the direction it's all going. And I think in this example that I verbalized, I kind of tried to show it for both a coder as well as a writer, but it applies to all occupations. There's a variant of this table for accountants. There's a variant of this table for finance. There's a variant of this table for growth. And one of the funny things with LinkedIn, I saw 1 or 2 derivatives of this table created for other occupations by some folks that reposted it because they found the sort of layout inspiring.
Yeah, that's a great insight. So thank you so much for having that. And again, we'll share this link to the LinkedIn post and then also the image itself within our newsletter. And I do encourage you, like if you've already trained like a chat GPT, you can show it this image and said, I want to create something like this for my work process that you know about. And it'll give you that baseline. Again, you'll probably have to go, make your own tweaks and things, but it'll give you start that process. And I think it's important to also note that as you go further down this level from level 1 to level 4, the amount of documentation and knowledge that you need to capture as you make your way to that is exponentially higher as well. So you need to have those processes set. Again, Raj, can you just speak like if your team member who has this level 4 autonomous thing going on, if they didn't have the set guardrails for that, what could kind of go wrong? And then what were the type of responses and or output you would get from something if it's not done well?
Yeah. So one thing that we're seeing is just sort of a pattern across all AI tools in general. And so if you look at like for those that have used ChatGPT, they have a feature in there which is called custom instructions. So if you go to your profile, click settings, you can add some custom instructions. And you can think of that as rules. And so some people will put stuff in there to say like, hey, call me John, or you don't need to be so polite, or just always be honest and include links to whatever things that you cite, right? And so the same thing applies to any of our other sort of work where we're using AI to help be our coding partner, our writing partner, our accounting partner. And you could think of this as like you have an intern on your team. You wouldn't just sort of throw them a document and just say, hey, go do this to do. You would provide context. And so that context is what I'm talking about here in terms of rules. And so you are seeing as people adopt Gen AI into their workflow, there's been an entire, I wouldn't call it industry, but there's been an entire sort of like new set of tribal knowledge and how people come up with the document of context to provide the AI, like what things to think about, to provide to help improve the chance of a better result. I would add though, in each of these cases, it is end to end, but there's still a final human in the loop to sort of click approve or click accept changes or whatever you want to call it, and may not be required for the smallest of tickets, but probably still a good idea because there is a chance, there's a 1 or 2 or 3% chance it's just grossly wrong. But what'll happen is over time, as you get better about providing instructions, just like you provide instructions to your intern, it'll get better at producing what you want. And so hopefully over time, the number of those errors or what the AI industry calls hallucinations would go down.
The most fascinating thing I found just about this leveling system, and specifically like with Cursor, is somebody like myself who's kind of grown up in the infrastructure engineering world, writing small Python, PowerShell, Bash scripts. What would have taken me 3 or 4 hours has taken me now 10 to 15 minutes, and sometimes even less, one-shotting it, as some people like to call it. And it's amazing. It's very helpful for those folks. I think to the audience where you're thinking, oh, hey guys, like I don't know how to code. I don't even know what coding is. Like you're seeing this right now in the sales and marketing process, because I know everybody listening is getting inundated with LinkedIn messages and spam emails or cold emails, right? All of that. The reason is it's getting easier and easier and easier to do this, to where it can, go find a potential client. It can research that client. It could add metrics depending on what it found. It could craft an email. It could basically send the email, or if you want to check it first, it'll ask for approval. Like Raj was saying, human in the loop, having somebody just clicking send to make sure the email isn't silly or you're sending it to somebody you definitely don't want to send it to. And it's going. So this time it's coming fast. I think it is kind of funny that development is like the first thing that's been severely impacted in a good way. I would have never guessed that. I don't think a lot of people would have guessed that. Maybe they would have, but it's just fascinating for sure.
I guess to comment on that, programming languages, because they're deterministic, is much easier for a computer to understand than English. English has so much nuance and interpretation, as we can just see on social in written form, where if you don't get the emotional voiceover and you're just reading it, it's like, well, did you mean that or did you mean this, right? And so not surprised to me that they're going after coding first, but I think the other angle a lot of people don't think about, from a business model perspective, it makes a ton of sense. And the reason is programming uses a lot of tokens. It has to write a lot of code, right? And so it just demands a lot of what they call inference, which for those that don't know what that means, is basically every time you ask a query to your AI chat, they call that inference, like the amount of energy or CPU it has to use, compute. And so the hot topic right now is inference time scaling, because the demand from all of these sort of AI coding agents is much greater than the energy and compute power that we have to even support it. So very exciting times ahead to see how we can just even meet the demand.
awesome context and feedback. And again, thanks for getting this matrix done. Again, we'll be sharing that with folks, and hopefully go follow Raj on LinkedIn. He posts stuff like this all the time, and is very, very helpful and very useful. And he's getting it from a different perspective than what we would normally have, because we're mainly B2B, where he's more, in the Silicon Valley space and how they're thinking out on that side as well. And I think that's really important to understand where they're coming from and what they're training for. Like you just said, like how it made sense for them to chase the developers first, because it's good for their ROI on that. And so I think it's great to have those insights. And so now that we've kind of worked our way through what that matrix would look like for as you step up, what would be your advice for businesses now to get that process started, like from the foundation? Like, think of folks who maybe they have ChatGPT on their phones, but as a team, they're not doing that. And they're definitely not doing it from an organization perspective. How can they get started to build that groundswell and hopefully get buy-in?
Yeah, I'm probably gonna sound a little bit like a parrot, reiterate what I was saying before, but I think the first step here, if you're running a team right now, you should go to your team and say, hey, everybody should go get a license to whatever tool your team wants to use as a starting point. Could be Google Gemini or whatnot, and we'll expense it. You want Gemini Plus, we'll expense it, or we could buy it for them, but depends how cost sensitive you are and how data concerned you are. Enterprise versions of these products are a little bit more expensive. The consumer versions are perfectly fine, and most people want to commingle it with their own personal searches, which is fine. Which people use Google for work and personal, so we should allow that for AI chat as well. But yeah, just go ahead and get started that way. And then I think the second thing I would do is, if there's any sort of company all hands or whatever sort of weekly or bi-weekly meeting or monthly meeting, to add a 10-minute segment or whatnot for somebody on the team to show how they're using AI to accelerate their workflow, and try to rotate across different archetypes and occupations. You don't just want engineering to be showing that. And the point there is, again, we have to encourage the show and tell and whatnot. It's super easy to get inundated with all the news. Like, nobody literally can keep up anymore. Just the volume, the pace of technology is just moving so fast. Don't even try. Just focus on, like, okay, you know what? Can I just be 10% better in this workflow? And then what'll happen is, over time, something will unlock. You're like, hey, you know what? Maybe I could try Gen AI for that. And like, you go try something. The next thing you know it, you don't even realize it, but it's like 10% here, 10% there, 10% on top of the previous 10%. A year later, you're looking back, you're like, whoa, I'm like 50% more productive than I was a year ago. And I'm just better at my work. Maybe I'm not a great writer, or maybe I need to, I go into meetings and I'm just not good at selling, but now I can go to AI and say, hey, let's have a live conversation. I'm going to try to sell, and you provide me critical feedback. Or here's some data about the different people in the room. Can you simulate what types of questions they're going to ask and help me prepare for them? You're seeing so much usage in the interviewing landscape. I mean, it's just remarkable how people are using it as a learning tool and as a preparation tool and education. I mean, I just think the use cases are endless. This is just like search. Search feels so old school. Seeing a bunch of links now, like I can't even use that experience anymore. I think don't overthink it. Just get started.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of the big things we often get asked by organizations to build some solution is like a proposal writing tool or something like that. And the first question I always ask them is what Gen AI are they using today? What LLMs do they have deployed? Like, what are their employees using? And most people that we're talking to, the leadership is like, oh, I don't think anybody's using anything. And I'm like, I probably bet somebody's using it somewhere, right? And so trying to get your arms around that to understand what people are using AI for today, because trying to segue into another topic of the ROI discussion, we often get this question around these AI tools. Any custom AI development right now, the ROI on it is not always there for small business. It's definitely not in most circumstances that we've seen, or it's difficult to calculate, right? And they don't want to do anything with AI unless there's an immediate ROI. You touched on it a little bit with the Gen AI use cases. We say it all the time, like, it doesn't matter what you use, whether it's Gemini, ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, as long as it's the lowest barrier of entry, your end users are using it daily, you're going to see some type of improvement there, whether it's in an ROI or just personal. They're spending 80% less time doing whatever it is they're taking out of their job, right? So I guess my question is, how are business leaders, especially ones from non-technical backgrounds, right? Like, think companies that have maybe 3 or 4 or 5 IT people, that 200 employees, and I know a lot of people in my network that want to push these tools, but leadership doesn't see the true value in it. They don't want to. That's going to be like one of the highest licensing costs they have right now. What would you say to that? And how do you think those people, not even just for consultants, but just people in IT trying to get this in their environment, how should they make that business case to their leadership?
Yeah, so I think there's several different questions underneath that question. I think as an employee, yes, maybe you shouldn't be using tools unless the company's approved it. Obviously, it depends on the size of your organization. You probably are already using Gemini or ChatGPT or Copilot. I would be at this point, with 500 million or whatever, 600 million monthly active users of ChatGPT, I'd be surprised if what percentage of people have never used it. It's got to be very small at this point. There's a lot you can just get out of the free version, right? Like you can, you don't even need to pay, right? Like now the question then becomes like, oh, should I be should I be concerned about uploading customer data or whatnot, right? Yeah. So obviously you need to be a little bit conscious of like what is allowed or not allowed, but there's tricks around this, right? So you could take customer data and you kind of know what it looks like, but don't upload the customer data, just upload the schema and go to ChatGPT and say, hey, I have a table that looks like this. Can you generate a bunch of sample data? Right? It'll generate sample data. Then you use the sample data to run whatever exercise or whatnot you want to run. So there's ways around this. Right? If you're just specifically looking at a paragraph or what, as a word editor, when you're already doing this, when you're running Grammar Checker, depending on how they implement that, when you run the Grammarly plugin, but these things are happening already, right? So I wouldn't over-index on some of these things. And the volume of data we're talking about, they're getting trillions of pieces of data, and things are broken up into small chunks, and nothing's really discernible at that kind of level, anyways. It's no different to sort of pasting that paragraph into Google to get feedback, or Google Translate, for example. People do that sometimes, all the time. And so these things are happening. So that's kind of one. I think the second thing is like, okay, am I talking about AI for productivity gain for my employees, or I'm talking about AI to automate processes within the company itself, right? So a common example you often hear is companies are like, I want to use AI to implement a chatbot, whether it's for sales or whether it's for customer support. That's very common. And what they're finding is like, hey, it's not perfect, and nobody said it was perfect, and if people are telling you it's perfect, that's a problem. And so then they go like, oh, well, then the ROI calculation changes and blah blah. Sure, but is it 90% of the way there? Yes, right. And so as long as the mindset is not replace, but it's to augment or to improve efficiency, then I think we're on the right track. I think where a lot of startups, at least in the Valley, we saw at least 2-3 years ago, a number of companies raise money against this mental model of like going into different specific vertical industries or whatnot and saying, I'm going to replace the workflow, right? And then they put it out there and they quickly realized, oh shoot, this thing is 94%, but it needs to be perfect because it's supposed to automatically schedule your meetings. And obviously that's the type of thing where if you schedule something wrong, that's an expensive error, right? There's like some errors that are acceptable, like, okay, but you suggested the wrong, content in this suggested article or whatnot, but like scheduling the meeting at the wrong time or including a fake citation on a legal brief, which we've been reading about publicly, these are unacceptable, right? And so they're certainly getting better on their side, but the reality is like if you're a small business, you can't accept that. And so as long as the framing and thinking is not I'm trying to replace, but I'm rather trying to improve or increase productivity or efficiency, then I think you'll find much more success. And then it kind of changes how you think about the problem. For example, let's say at a UI accessibility team, right? 2-3 years ago, they might have said, hey, we're going to have AI replace all the UI accessibility people on your team. And I hate to be using that example because we're talking about replacing physical people, but clearly AI is not going to capture every edge case, right? It's going to miss 5%, like it doesn't know the latest France GDPR regulations or whatever it is that comes up, or like it doesn't understand this part of the UX or the context or whatnot, right? So rather, if you don't frame it that way, but you frame it as a tool to augment your existing accessibility UI team to go faster, they can now use it as an assistive tool. And they're like, oh, I missed that case, or I missed that permutation that didn't think about it. Or oh, that kind of made me change how I think about this, right? Now they're going faster and they're able to do their work 4 times faster than before, and getting more done, right? So as long as we think about it that way, I think that's the right framing in thinking about Gen AI, at least today.
Yeah, those are all great insights. Really appreciate that. And I like that you broke it down to the two use cases where it's the individual contributor and then also the business and team as a whole. Talking about the individual contributor, let's pivot over to, you did Maven, I think, a Super IC talk. And can you just tell us, for the folks that, maybe they are an organization where there is a lot of pushback, how can they themselves become super ICs or individual contributors? And then how can leaders also help identify and boost up the folks that think could be super ICs?
When I did that Maven talk, and I was doing it slightly intentionally, but I also was not trying to instill anxiety, but I was trying to create a little bit of anxiety. And I don't like using this language, but you hear this language, which is there are some people out there saying AI is going to replace humans doing the same work. I think there's going to be some roles where that's certainly going to be the case, no doubt. But there's many new roles being created, and we can talk about Vibe operations, which I think is a new kind of role that's being opened up later. But I think for the vast majority, it's going to be an acceleration tool. And if anything, companies are hiring even more people now because they're realizing we can grow faster. And look at all the new revenue, the pace at which we're getting to 100 million ARR, billion ARR is insane. Right. So the revenue creation is happening at a pace we've never seen before. I do think so. That's sort of one camp. Then there's another camp that says, hey, we're not going to replace humans with AI, but humans who don't use AI will be replaced with humans that use AI. And, again, I hate this kind of very strong armed sort of language, but probabilistically, there's some truth to that. And that's mostly just because somebody leveraging Gen AI as part of their workflow is likely moving faster. Not necessarily the case. We've seen some research around developers where the impact of Gen AI being a little bit barbelled, where, for example, those most junior in their career need the most help. So Gen AI can be a massive acceleration for them. And those most senior in their career, Gen AI is helpful because they can code review it really fast. They can read the code that's generated really fast. Whereas those in the middle of their career, they get the generated code from AI, but then they read code slower. And so the net doesn't become as much of a productivity gain. So it's kind of interesting just even looking at that. But that being said, at a macro level, I do expect those that use AI to become a necessary skill to be differentiated and defensible in the sort of future of work. And so, again, not trying to instill anxiety, but I think, the time to get started is now. And you don't need to be a PhD level understanding of how to use these tools. I still discover new use cases all the time. I mean, there's new podcast series that have emerged just looking at, like, I think one is called How I AI, just emerged looking at how people are using AI in their day-to-day workflow. But you just need to get started. And once you get started, you're going to start leaning on it more and more, just like any new sort of behavior or habit. And next thing you know it, you're going to be like, wait, I didn't think about using Gen AI for medical feedback, but it can be incredible. Now, you might say, hey, we can't trust anything it says. Sure. But at least you can get a whole bunch of questions that you can then go to your doctor with and ask and have a little bit more context. So you can kind of have that sort of next level discussion, which you may not have been able to do earlier without spending countless days reading papers and whatnot. I think if you want to be a super IC, which is super individual contributor, I kind of define that as using Gen AI to replace your low leverage work so you can focus on high leverage tasks. And so a lot of that is sort of getting started and looking at places in your day that you can apply Gen AI to accelerate.
Yeah, it's good. You talked about kind of documenting your day, and I've recently been doing this probably for a little over a month now with voice notes, and then I just transcribe the voice notes to text and then have ChatGPT or whatever I'm using that day kind of make it all pretty and ask questions. Hey, like, what did I not do right? Here are my goals for this month, and it's May 31st. What did I not do in May that I should have been doing? Here were my goals at the start of the month, right? And just something as simple as that has already generated tons of ideas as far as like, hey, let's try to automate this part of my day instead of doing this manually. Let's automate this. And so I think that's huge. I tell that to people all the time. Capturing the data, and data is anything. It could be your voice notes, it can be your text. Like, capture all of that stuff, because as these tools get better, it's really easy for me as a technical person to do all that, to transcribe it, to put it in an LLM, and then also make sense of it all. But even for, you don't have to be technical anymore to do this stuff. The tools are getting better day in and day out. And so that's the great thing. One of the other things I want to pivot to as well, you mentioned it about the jobs, and it's a touchy subject, right? Because you understand why there's a lot of fear, and I'm not going to call it misinformation, but it's like you're hearing it from both sides, and it's always like this big dramatic event. The thing that I always go back to, when vehicles were created in the Industrial Revolution, like, think about all the jobs around vehicles right now, like that didn't exist prior to vehicles, right? And I know that's not a one-to-one comparison, but there's going to be additional things created that come out of this, and you're going to start being able to think about other stuff that you didn't have the time to think about because you were so busy doing mind-numbing work, right? We're going to be seeing small companies with maybe 10 to 50 people building billion-dollar businesses. That could happen now, right? Whereas before, it wasn't really possible. And so I think for anybody that is ambitious, that wants to use these tools, that wants to embrace this, especially the younger generation, I mean, it's a huge advantage because the possibilities are, I won't say somewhat endless, but it's just getting so much easier to get started and to build things now. Whereas before, Brad and I, we're family, right? So we've thought about all kinds of ideas. What's been the showstopper there? Like, we're not expert programmers. We're not expert developers. We know how some of this stuff works. 10 years ago, if we had these tools, at least we could have got started, right? And before we couldn't. We had to teach ourselves how to code. And unless that's something you really love and are passionate about, it's not easy to learn that, right? It's not easy for the average person to learn that type of stuff. I look at it as I'm a glass half empty type of person typically, but around this, like to me, it's about half full when it comes to these tools, because it's helped me so much day
I
in and
think
day
you're
out.
also pointing at a macro trend, which is really around what I call the ownership economy, which is like the side hustle. People want to be their own boss, build stuff, create. I mean, never before have we unlocked creators in the way that we have today. Gen AI is letting people rapidly create images, video, any sort of modality, text, articles, games, applications, right? All this sort of creativity is getting unlocked, where before you had to go find fractional experts or whatnot to help you do this, which is just phenomenal. And imagine this then coming to the physical world. Just because I have to plug it, just because of Mozilla, the teams I manage within new products at Mozilla is what we call the SMB studio. So it's the small medium business studio. And one of the products we have is Solo, which is an AI website builder. But all of this is around enabling people to create more businesses, more easily be an owner and grow, right? And so I'm just kind of wanting to sort of show that connection and tie that loop, because I think Gen AI is creating yet another level of acceleration here.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, it's soloist.ai. Again, we'll include it in the show notes and in the newsletter as well. I've looked at it. It looks great. We actually need to stand up our own website for a side project we're working on. So I think I'm going to take it through its paces and give it a shot. And for those that don't know, Raj has extensive experience in the startup space, having multiple successful exits he's had. Raj, knowing that all these tools are ripe for the solopreneur or into smart teams. If you have an idea, like come see that, get you an MVP. What would your advice be for people who just have an idea and just starting out? If you could go back to yourself 25 years ago, whenever you were starting your first company, how would you use these tools to kind of change that trajectory?
Gary Chan had this thing, and he talked about what to hire today. When you hire people today, what to look for, right? Let's assume AI is going to be all your knowledge. What do you look for? And he talked about high agency. High agency has always been necessary for people building startups, because you need to be kind of self-motivated, go getter, go get it done, whatever, right? But the other word he talks about, which is a word we're starting to hear almost overloaded, but you hear it all over the place, is the word taste. And it's sort of, whether you call it taste, whether you call it sensibility, whether you call it judgment, it's not just design sensibility, but it's like priority sensibility, or having a better sense of like what to work on, or what market to look at, or like all of that sort of stuff, right? And as someone who's had multiple startups and probably an equal number of failures, this stuff's all really hard. Like, you have to also get a little lucky. I tell people, if you roll enough bowling balls, you eventually get a strike. But I also tell people, I don't know what the current numbers are, but like some 10 years ago, at that time, venture, success rate was like less than 14% or something like that. And that was like the number of Series A backed companies that returned at least money in, which meant 86% of these well-funded companies with smart people and smart founders and smart people being involved and whatnot still failed, right? And so how that all happens. Anyways, full circle, or taking a step back, to sort of answer your question. I mean, you're using Gen AI in every step of this process, right? This is new product development. This is 0 to 1. You're using Gen AI to validate your idea. You're using Gen AI to understand the segments. We like to build something within new products at Mozilla called 2x2s, where you kind of map an idea. It's effectively a segmentation exercise or positioning exercise. You kind of map an idea to an X and Y axes, where you kind of choose two attributes that could be like, if you look at the website space, that could be like no code to like full code, right? Solo's kind of in the node code space, but like Lovable, Bolt, whatnot, those are kind of in the low code space, right? So, and then the other axes could be like WYSIWYG to like AI enabled or whatever, right? Like, I mean, who knows, right? So like, you could choose whatever axes you want. You run this axes exercise over and over again. It helps you figure out your positioning segmentation. You could use AI for that to help you with that sort of process. Next comes like, okay, I think I know I want to build a dog walking service in Memphis for senior dogs of this breed only, right? I did my positioning exercise. I found that there's an opportunity here for X, Y, and reason, whatnot, right? Well, like, okay, now what should the experience look like? So now I could go into AI. I could use ChatGPT. I could go to Figma. I have AI for this. I could go to Vercel. It doesn't matter, whatever, right? And say, I want to visualize this sort of experience. Here's an idea of what I think it could look like. Here's the different things I want. You just go through this like conversational exercise, and now you have a prototype. You're like, I don't like that. I don't like this feature. I like that. And you keep iterating, and now like, okay, now you have a not fully functional version, but you have an experience that you can go and show in people, right? At least a first level prototype. Now you take that experience and you go like, okay, who do I know that needs this service? Well, maybe I don't know anybody. I can go back to AI and ask like, okay, how do I find audience for this? And it'll give you some creative ideas like, oh, go post a message on the local billboard at your library. Go post an ad on Craigslist. Go call other dog walkers and see if they could be customers and where they have their business information listed or whatever. Right now, you find a few people to go talk to, right? And you can show them your prototype and say, what do you think? And they're like, well, I like this, I like that, I'd pay for this, I wouldn't pay for that. Now you take it back and you iterate. And so you can see how the sausage making part of the 0 to 1 exercise, and 0 to 1 meaning 0 to version 1 is commonly used framing, can now be massively accelerated through AI. It's not replacing everything, and you still need to have some taste. You still need to have intuition and some sensibility. Does this make sense or not? I would caution to just do everything the AI says, because odds are it'll yield something that's a more mediocre result in the end, where it looks like every other product. You need to have your sort of own unique angle or take. I think every step of the way. And now you get to a point where you want to build it. Maybe you have enough technical chops. You can use one of these AI assisted tools and take that low code prototype and build it into a full version, actually deploy it, make it live. Now you need help to go market it. You go back to AI and say, okay, what are some strategies to market it? Right now, you need a website, whatever, like every step of the way. And that's what's so amazing is because as an individual, you can make all this progress.
Yeah, and I'll say some advice that I enjoy, because sometimes it's, at least for me, I have great thoughts, but trying to translate that into text is sometimes difficult for me, but I could say it just fine if I'm having a conversation. Like, use the voice feature if you're not today with pretty much, I'm pretty sure all these products have it now, where you're literally having a conversation with AI. To me, that has been so beneficial, and I have it up, on my computer, ready to go. Luckily in this world, like a lot of people work remote, you can have these conversations, all day. And so that would be my advice too. Like, use that tool set because it's very beneficial to me. And I don't think a lot of people, definitely not a lot of non-super user folks are using that, and they need to, because it's right there and it's very beneficial.
I was just planning a trip because I'm in Europe in the fall. I was like, what? I'm going to take some time off. I didn't live in the UK, but I effectively lived in the UK. My wife is British at one point, so I've seen a lot of Europe. And so I was like, I want to go do something new, right? So I'm driving, opened up AI voice mode, and had a full conversation. I'm like, I'm looking for something adventurous, blah blah. What can you suggest? Okay, well, no. Can you tweak it this way? Can you tweak it? And kind of narrowed it down to 3 choices. And I could have done that through text chat, but it'd been a lot slower. It would have taken much longer amount of time. But here I am in a live call with an expert travel planner, or whatever you want to call it, travel agent, during my drive. So it's kind of like low cerebral work. Like, I can drive and still have this kind of conversation. I'm not like thinking deeply. And spent 45 minutes going back
Yeah.
and forth, maybe 50 minutes. I kind of landed at something, and still may or may not do it, which is the Dolomites. But like, it was a great discussion.
Yeah, that's awesome. The beauty is the roadmap you just shared for a solopreneur or an entrepreneur starting out. That's no different than for a business. Just think of that solopreneur's stack. Just move that to a team. It's the same way. It's like, how do you revolutionize your team? Follow that same sort of process. Like, you're building groundswell within an organization. You have a use case for a new tool within your organization or a new workflow. Have those same sort of conversations. That was my kind of like sneaky way of getting him to kind of find those alignments there. So thank you, Raj, for sharing that. And I wish we could keep going. We could probably talk for Raj all day. So I think we'll start winding things down in the next 5 or 10 minutes. And so what we like to do, Raj, is just start, finish up with some hot takes, and like some guidance to kind of, I like to say go forth a lot. As you can see in my background, I'm a big space nerd. So like go forth, go do something. I'll say most companies don't need cutting edge AI. They need adoption consistency, right? Like you said, with the leverage, right? I believe one of your quotes is shift from measuring experience to measuring leverage. The cutting edge technology is the technology, but the secret sauce, again, is always going to be your ability to adapt your organization and then your internal knowledge within your organization.
Yeah, and I'll go, mine's really short. I think the big thing, my big takeaway out of this is and I hope the listeners, it's the same, is use these tools and use it daily, and rethink how you're using it all the time, and have it help you do that, right? You don't have to think of this stuff all on your own. Have the LLMs help you do this. So make sure you're using these tools. Don't have this. Yeah, I just know there's just a lot of people that feel like, oh man, I don't want to use this. Like, I'm losing my skills, or this is cheating. Like, this tool, it's not going away. This is staying here forever. This is kind of a new stage right now where we're at. Everybody's figuring this out as we go. And so just keep that ball moving, and it's constant knowledge and constant learning. That's what this is going to take, I think, for the workforce. So that was my big takeaway.
I don't know if those are hot takes.
Yeah, mine's not real. I didn't have a great hot take this week, but I mean, it's, yeah.
With intention to try to be a hot take. and I could go either way on this, but I think AGI is many, many years away. And so let me explain that. I think the productivity gain is massive today. And I think, it'll get better next year and we're going to get that 95% gain. But I think the bar between that and getting to the point where it's autonomously learning machine, and truly that sort of assistant in the house, or that true assistant that you can just effectively delegate tasks. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of the term ASI, but going from artificial general intelligence to artificial superintelligence, where the humans aren't delegating tasks to computers, the computers are delegating tasks to humans, and the computers do the strategy. I just think all this is many, many, many years away. I think we're artificially defining it in the way that we want. For sure, the assistants today are incredible assistants and helpful, but do I think of them as inventing reasoning in new and sort of unique ways? Yes, they're doing some of that, but I think we're many, many years away.
I don't think personally this is a hot take, but I think a lot of people will. And it goes back, Raj, what you were saying about the safety behind it. And I think you and I probably agree a lot about that. I've been to a ton of AI conferences, mostly around oil and gas. That's like the biggest thing a lot of these folks are talking about. They're looking at it from a safety approach first. And I think that's smart. Like, obviously safety is very important. There's regulations, there's laws that have to be followed, but don't let it slow down the innovation. And I know for a fact there's a ton of companies that I've talked to, people that I've talked to, that have stopped innovating because they're just worried about the safety around these tools. And I think that's going to be damaging in the end. So I hate to say it, but don't care about safety. I mean, definitely care about it, but it kind of needs to be a parallel thing, in my opinion. So there's my hot take. Hopefully that's a little hotter.
Well, yeah, I was going to go further and actually say, I think nuclear power is going to be the dominant power over the next couple decades.
Yeah. I think you would agree. Yeah, we would definitely agree with that.
Because I think some of the limitations around this is just simply power.
Yep. I think that's the biggest thing. And the infrastructure just it's so reliant on the government. Like I said in the last episode, the power needs are so high because the private sector has pledged, whether they've actually going to follow through, but pledged to up to $1 trillion to help the infrastructure across the sector. The private sector has pledged that. So just think what the government will have to do. And Eric Schmidt, again, he had a great talk in front of Congress and others, former CEO of Google. It takes 8 to 10 years to stand all this stuff up. And that's where I think the AGI, like you said, the AGI, there's a lot of things from the Apple's just announced their research, but also the power constraints and then the chipset constraints. All of those supply chain issues, I think, are going to slow development. I think we're going to, it's going to take us some time to get there, but that doesn't mean don't start your journey now. So I think our final challenge would be like, document one of your workflows, pick one of the blocks, one of the little areas on that workflow, and then experiment on that with AI. And then obviously Robert kind of talked about this too. Start using this today, but not in a silo, not in your own black box. As you're using stuff, go to events or have these town hall meetings where you open the floor 10 minutes at a time to folks like, hey, just how are you using AI? Because it's going to get the wheels turning and you're going to come up with more creative ways to use that. So Raj, thank you again for joining us. I think I'm just going to leave the floor open to you for a couple minutes to whatever you'd like to speak to, and let folks know where they can follow you. And we'll have links to all that stuff as well. I think it's Mobile Raj on most social media, but we'll link to all your social media and things. But just thanks for being here, and so the floor is yours.
I don't have anything further. I just thank you for the opportunity to chat. People can always catch me offline if you have any other questions. And we have a lot of exciting things happening at Mozilla too. So come check it out with Firefox. And this is the future of browsers and agents and whatnot.
Yeah. And again, awesome. We talk about AI ethics, how that's really important, and Mozilla is leading that space. We won't dive too deep into that, but like if you care about AI ethics and what we're doing things ethically, I think Mozilla is even challenging Meta at this point. So follow Mozilla, follow Raj, and then also try soloist.ai. If you need a new website, go there. It's a pretty cool, slick tool set. It's free to get started, so there's no reason not to at least put it through its paces and kind of see those things. Again, all those links will be in our show notes and our newsletter. Thanks again, Raj, for joining us. Robert, thanks as usual, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. If you get anything from this conversation, hope we started it as start small, think big for a reason. You just have to take that first step and start using these tools. And the more and more you get comfortable with them, the more you're going to accomplish. So, thanks again. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
We want to hear about your AI and automation journey, and we'd love for you to get involved with Start Small, Think Big. If you'd like to participate or offer feedback, please reach out to us anytime via email at contact@digitalmeld.io or use the contact form on our website, digitalmeld.io/contact. Also, please help spread the word by liking, subscribing, and sharing our podcasts on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks.